Good evening, I'm Sarah Schultz, Director of Education and Community Programs at the Walker Arts Center, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to tonight's program with John Yau. This event is part of a long, creatively and intellectually rich partnership between Rain Taxi Review of Books and the Walker Arts Center. Over the last 10 years, the Free Verse series has brought some of the most inventive and experimental practitioners of language to the Walker and the Twin Cities. It seemed only fitting that it would be a poet who would launch our investigative and experiential leap into the work of Yves Klein. Tonight is our first class in a series called A Cul Decline, and I hope you all have your notebooks out, as we are about to begin exploring Yves Klein's curiosities, life, and work through a series of lectures, gallery talks, art labs, film, and experimental moments. Over the next 2 months, we will scream, learn judo, invent pigment, speak French, and engage in wide-ranging conversations that bring us closer to this multifaceted and revolutionary thinker. And I encourage you to find your way more than once, if you have not already, into the exhibition Yves Klein, With the Void, Full Powers. All of A Cul Decline programs are offered free as part of the Walker's Target Free Thursday Night program, made possible by the very generous support of Target. On a housekeeping note, we are webcasting this event, and so ask that you use the microphones during the Q&A. As promised, a lucky member of the audience will receive a copy of the glorious catalog for the exhibition, and if you have not already filled out an entry form, we will be collecting these during the Q&A. Also following tonight's program, Alliance Française will be leading a post-reading discussion en français in the Bazinet lobby, and John Yau will be signing his books in English. On that note, I would like to thank my colleague Ashley Duffalo for coordinating this program, and I would like to welcome to the stage our conspirator, Eric Lorberer, who indeed holds full powers.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you all for coming. It's indeed been an honor to have this decade-strong partnership with the Walker Arts Center and to bring the various arts of contemporary literature, poetry, fiction, nonfiction. We've had cartoonists. It has been a real honor to present this work here in this setting. This collaboration takes usually two angles. Sometimes we focus on the art of writing as an art form itself, which indeed it is. And at other times, like tonight, we look for intersections between that particular art and perhaps a particular show here at the Walker. When we're planning this event and we're thinking, what kind of writer might know something about Yves Klein? I immediately thought of John Yau, who is not only one of my favorite poets. His work is characterized for the past few decades by an incredible sensual muscularity and wry sensibility, philosophical acumen. And if you pick up any of the books out there today, you'll see that instantly. Read any line, I guarantee it. But John Yau is also an esteemed art critic. He has written definitive studies of Jasper Johns and Andy Warhol, countless by now catalog essays and introductions, and especially with the art of painting is highly regarded as a critic. So essentially I just called John and said, what do you think about Yves Klein? And he said, I love Yves Klein. And I said, how would you like a little assignment? And John heartily accepted, and tonight we will be privileged to hear the results. You'll be hearing a world premiere of John Yau on Yves Klein. So with that, thank you again, and please join me in welcoming John Yau.
was an assignment. All right, I guess I should say a little bit about what I did. I did not write any poem describing an Yves Klein painting, though I could probably do one off the top of my head. Blue, 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 sponge, blue. I wrote 10 pieces. It's called My 10 Monochrome Adventures. I quote Klein. All quotes not by Klein are accurate. I attribute some things to Klein that he didn't say, but in consultation with him during a seance, he told me that he would say these things. Okay. 1. Words from Yves Klein. At present, my paintings are invisible. I do not speak in a utopian manner in proposing such a program. My paintings remain invisible, and I wish to display them in a clear and positive manner. Everything I write today precedes this presentation. My propositions are landscapes of freedom. I want to show man and nature with the traces and marks he leaves behind, traces and marks that are always marvelous, artificial, ephemeral, and yet indestructible. Perhaps it seems to you that I'm attempting the impossible, that I'm throwing myself towards something that is inhuman. I had no affection for oil paint. The colors seemed dead to me. Yet art is the glue that holds the entire universe together. At present, my paintings are invisible, which is why I decided to penetrate still further into this landscape. The physical painting gives its right to exist to one single fact, that one believes only in the visible, while quite obscurely sensing the essential presence of something else, at times almost invisible. The painter is the one who knows how to speak of that real value. 2. I dwell in possibility, Emily Dickinson. I dwell in impossibility, Yves Klein. You should understand this about my work. I did not want you to read a painting. I wanted you to bathe in it before words domesticated the experience, and you turned to words such as illumination. Paintings should not be sentenced to sentences. Painting is color, I yelled at Pierre Restinet, my first champion and biggest supporter. Color banishes words from its domain. When you read a painting, you turn it into language, but there's so much that cannot be turned into language that each of us experiences every day. A red shadow leaks out of a rusted car. Green smoke rises from behind the horizon. The color of your mother's voice the last time she spoke to you. These are thresholds that you must cross to reach the domain where words mar every tangible impossibility. We put our memory of these experiences aside in favor of what is known and we believe knowable. We say we're going to the beach and we will look at the ocean, but that is not what happens. We go there to ponder its parcel of infinity. True poets and artists know where language ends, which is why they go there as quickly as possible. Some settle for going beyond the possible into possibility, but others want to dwell in the impossible. I'm not talking fantasy here, because that version of the impossible is just a story about a girl named Thumbelina. The ones who go to where two roads diverge in a yellow wood are not poets, because they mistakenly believe that experience can be reduced to a lesson about choices. True poets know that language is neither window nor mirror. The mistake is to believe that the opposite is true, that words or signs are arbitrary. This is my example of why words are not arbitrary. Charles Baudelaire believed that there are perfumes for which all matter is porous. They can permeate the air of one's dreams. Our thoughts quiver and the shadows that fall over us. They begin to free their wings and rise in flight, tinged with azure, glazed with rose, spangled with gold. Azure, rose, gold. I was not thinking of Baudelaire when I made my paintings, but he was clearly dreaming of me when he wrote The Perfume Flask. Can't you see that this is how I, radiating outward, happened? Yves Klein was born because Baudelaire predicted this propitious event by naming colors which, like all colors, escape the confines of their names. Even black can get away from its name, which is why Malevich had to surround it with white. But what is color that isn't surrounded by another color? What is that boundless world we catch a glimpse of whenever we look up at the sky? Is it so vast that we must turn away from it, afraid that it will swallow us up, which it will? Astronomy, the Greeks believed, was a royal science, which means I'm a royal painter. Do not confuse me, however, with a painter of royalty. With Ang, who used lines to hold and improve the faces of his sitters, who believed in the despotic power of beauty. I'm not interested in beauty. I'm not Andy Warhol. He longed for possibility, but was afraid of what it might tell him. I dwell in impossibility and want to be embraced by what it will tell me. My name is Yves Klein. There's a photograph of me that you might know. I've put on my best suit and jumped out a window. My arms are outspread, but they are not wings. I do not need them to fly, nor am I the prince of clouds, Baudelaire's albatross, fallen from the sky. Screw Marinetti. My arms are not the wings of a drunkard beating against the wall. They are the outstretched arms of a diver. I fall effortlessly through the air, but I am never completely fallen. The cobblestones and I will never meet. I hover in a miracle, which is why you believe in the photograph, even after you've learned how I tricked you. It wasn't that hard to do. The true magician shows everyone how the trick was done. And after seeing how you were deceived, you believe in the trick all the more. I jumped out the window, and I stayed in the air, which is where you wanted me to stay. I dwell in impossibility, that zone that lies beyond here and there, while embracing both. I am a prince of the infinite sky. I do not fall to earth, and you are never there to catch me. 3. Everything exists to end up in a book. Stefan Mallarmé. Nothing exists except in a book, which is the imagination. Yves Klein. In 1954, I published 2 books, Yves Peinture and Huguenot Peinture, which documented the paintings I wanted to preserve. The preface for each book was made of thick black lines rather than words, which links the books to Mallarmé. Quote, an insinuation, simple in the silence. The purported author of the prefaces was Claude Pascal. His name links him to the philosopher who wrote, contradiction is not a sign of falsity, nor the lack of contradiction a sign of truth. It is said that you can't have it both ways, but they're wrong. The infinite sky shows us this with every sun shower. Each book has 10 tipped-in color plates. In Yves Peinture, each plate is signed Yves and the name of a city in the lower right-hand corner. It might be where I made these paintings of colored paper. Isn't that what happens to a painting when it's put in a book? It becomes a piece of colored paper. So why not show that? My secret favorite was signed Yves Tokyo because it is where I earned a black belt in judo. Each tipped-in plate is of a monochromatic painting that never existed, except in the mind's eye. To make love is to be neither abstract nor literal. To argue over whether the paintings existed or not is to miss the point. It's like arguing over how many angels can dance on the head of a pin when everyone knows that infinity is not a number, but a feeling, at once overwhelming and elusive, impossible to grasp and equally impossible to avoid. Just try sitting alone in a bath for an hour with no one in the next room. Walt Whitman embraced multitudes and saying the body electric, but to embrace infinity knowing that it will embrace you and that it begins to do so long before you arrived in this quadrant is the song I wanted to sing, its single note followed by a silence of equal length, a silence that, as John Cage knew, can never be silent. The fact that the paintings could have existed should have sent you on your way. Where would you turn if you could not see them? I wanted you to see what could not be seen, to glimpse that impossibility, to be touched by something small and vast, and know that you are somewhere between them, moving in both directions at the same time. 4. For beauty is nothing but the beginning of terror that we are still able to bear, and we revere it so because it calmly disdains to destroy us. Raina Maria Rilke. I embrace the sky, which sees and seizes the blue inside my head. Yves Klein. This is what I wrote in 1954, before Pollock died and Andy Warhol was a household name. Quote, I want to believe that in the future, one will get to painting only paintings of one color at a time and without anything other than color. In literature, there might be a way to get to the same point, a funny novel without plot, without closure, without subject, without message, and only with an atmosphere, a feeling of the same quality, very regular, profound, and unified. After reading the statement, why would anyone think that I believed that painting was dead, or that I wanted to kill it? If painting actually died, it would be the subject of a poorly conceived novel with a bulky plot. There would be a convoluted roll call of antagonists and protagonists. There would be eyewitnesses, each of them eager to testify as to the veracity of the reports. Everything in this book would be predictable, from the color of sky to predicting what would happen after the inevitable death of painting. Other books would focus on painting's last days and hours and report on those who were crowded gleefully at its deathbed. Someone would claim that he or she was there, dressed for the occasion. Further reports and detailed footnotes would be added. Eventually, the novel would become encrusted with barnacles and sink into the sea, which is an imperfect mirror of the perfectly blue, infinite sky. Who among us will cry out that it is easier to live in a world where painting is dead and pretend to lament its loss? 5. Oh, let me have some water. It's not blue, but I'll drink it anyway. I thought of all these wacky things I could do, but then I didn't. I was going to buy a blue shirt. I was going to make everybody order a blue drink. 5. And you all know that there's 2 books William Gass wrote on being blue, and Maggie Nelson wrote a book, Bluettes. And just, I couldn't find my copy of On Being Blue in my messy bookcase, which I thought was a blessing, because I read it many years ago. And I had read Bluettes about when it came out a few months ago, and I decided not to find it. But I decided to quote William Gass anyway. 5. The blue we bathe in is the blue we breathe. The blue we breathe, I fear, is what we want from life and find only in fiction. For the voyeur, fiction is what's called going all the way. Blue is not a color, but the acceptance that one is dissolving into the infinite. This is why I'm blue and breathing. Yves Klein. A few months ago, for example, I felt the urge to register the signs of atmospheric behavior by recording on canvas the instantaneous traces of spring showers, of south winds and lightning. Needless to say, the last mentioned ended in a catastrophe. For instance, a trip from Paris to Nice might have been a waste of time had I not spent it profitably recording the wind. I placed a canvas, freshly coated with paint, upon the roof of my white Citroën. As I zoomed down Route Nationale 7 at the speed of 100 kilometers an hour, the heat, the cold, the light, the wind, and the rain all combined to age my canvas prematurely. At least 30 to 40 years were condensed into one day. The only thing annoying about the project is that I have to travel with the painting all the time. The problem with traveling with a painting on the roof of your car all the time is that you cannot get out of your car until the paint is dry. In fact, a car is a rather poor vehicle to carry you to infinity because you might lose your way, like James Dean or Jackson Pollock. Or you might have to stop for gas, which is black smoke disguised as a liquid. Although handsome and a painter, I am not like Dean or Pollock. I wanted to be embraced by infinity, not run into it. That is because I dream of passing through its final barrier and emerging on the other side. To reach this place, you must send your thoughts toward the sky. You must believe that no bird will cross their path as your thoughts ascend higher and higher, shedding their colors as they climb toward home. 6. Robert Desnos and Yves Klein meet in the sky. This beautiful summer afternoon is merely a witness that records what occurs. The sky, a silent and static state, impressed by the very essence of movement. A tidal wave of color represented by the frenzy of the useless. A tidal wave which all artists employ, is a sensory surface. The painting was so blue that the clouds looked like foam on the sea. Artists, in their chemical state, are mediums that the sky witnesses. The flame of poetry is washing the houses, sea, and clouds. 7. The blue of the sky, if we were to examine its many image values, would require a long study in which we would see all the types of material imagination being determined according to the basic elements of water, fire, earth, air. Basic elements of imagination. Blue, study. Basic material, the study of and in which the air types its image. Imagination would require imagination to study all elements basic to the sky, in which would be determined material blue, of blue fire in the blue earth, of blue earth in the water and air. According to the sky, we would study all the types of elements basic to the imagination. According to the blue fire, we would see the material imagination in the sky, its many image values, a sky in which we would see the imagination, the basic blue air, the image values its study of fire, all types of elements in the sky. If we were to examine the imagination, we would see fire in the air and water. Many values require basic types. According to the study in which we see all types of images, we, according to the basic elements of we, blue imagination, fire requires the earth with water on air. Imagination requires we see air of sky, sky on which the sky types, blue material imagination. Actually, the plan is now to write 30 of these. Don't ask, or 24. I have to get some number that's alchemically correct. So it got really intense after a while. The numbers kept getting higher and higher, but I think I think I'm going to go for 24. 8. An alchemist understands why I wrote, my paintings are the ashes of my art. Fire, earth, air, water circulate among each other. Fire is necessary for the transmutation of matter into spirit, or what the materialists focus on, turning lead into gold. The materialists never admit to reversing the process and turning gold into lead. I'm being polite. I'm not a materialist. I turn my paintings into ashes in order to rise through the sky toward the blue that waited on the other side of what I could see. An alchemist dwells in the possible, while I inhabit the impossible, intoxicated on color. That is why I am not an alchemist. I was born in an atomic age where all matter can suddenly vanish to leave behind nothing but what can be imagined. I want to live inside the serene color that emerges after the sudden flash of light that spreads across this planet, turning it to ashes, the paintings of blue world. Nine. What I wanted from art was impossible. It is what every artist wants. If you settle for the possible, then your failure is ordinary, although, in a few cases, spectacular. I didn't want what was there for the taking, the images of things that could be named. I didn't want to add names to the vocabulary. I rejected the ordinary and the extraordinary because those are rungs one learns how to climb. I do not need a ladder of wood. I do not need a ladder made of wood to reach the sky. I rejected all the tried and true ways because I wanted to attain a state that exceeded the dimensions by which we are bound to the earth. Never anyone but you, the poet wrote, despite stars and loneliness, despite the trees mutilated at nightfall. Never anyone but you will follow her path, which is mine. The further you go, the bigger your shadow gets. In a place where there are no shadows because there are no bodies, I wanted my shadow to embrace me. I wanted to dissolve in its cold, sweet embrace. I wanted to dwell in the everlasting impossible. This is why I'm a realist, which is different from being a new realist. I'm not a new realist, but a timeless one. Why? Because I believe in miracles. Therefore, it should not come as a surprise that I do not consider myself an artist of the avant-garde. Anyone can be toilet trained. Look around you, and you will see that nearly everyone is toilet trained. Only artists who are toilet trained can have their work in a museum. Having work in a museum is not why I became an artist. I became an artist because I wanted what art couldn't give me. I wanted to be immersed in what I could not experience, the impossible. Okay, this is the last one. I once went to a concert of Webern, and I'm not going to do this. This fantasy popped in my head. And Webern, of course, is famous for writing such short pieces, so they played one, and then they had the intermission, and they played it again after the intermission. So I thought this would take longer to read, but it took longer to write, if that's any consolation. Okay. Cubism was not the logical extension of Cézanne. My monochromes are not the logical extension of Malevich and Mondrian. I am not the logical extension of Fred Klein and Marie Raymond, despite the fact that they were my parents and they were painters. blue is not the logical extension of Piero della Francesca's vision of Mary's robe. It is obscurity becoming visible. I became visible when I chose to be invisible in, indivisible from my paintings. It was my ghost you saw, issuing instructions, standing behind a curtain, wearing a suit, covering a nude woman in paint. I was never visible, even now. Infinity is not eternity, where you are suspended like a bridge between here and there. Eternity is a place, but infinity is an event. I wink at you from infinity. Thank you. Thanks. I'm willing to answer questions as long as don't have to continue being Yves Klein. So, if someone wants to ask me anything, I don't know who's going to win the lottery. No question? Yes?
Wait.
We're going to give you a microphone.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a couple questions. One is, what do they look like on the page? Are they rectangles? Are they prose poem?
Some of them are poems and some of them are prose. Some of them, little.
Thank you. That's what I was wondering.
But the first one, this one,
Uh-huh.
it's all from things he said, but it's rearranged, and I broke it up to make it into a poem. And in fact, I don't know if it's important. I didn't feel good till I wrote that one, which I finished at 1 a.m. last night. Then I felt like, okay, somehow all the others that I hadn't had one that kind of, not summed him up, but said something that sort of came directly from him in some way that I felt worth, and I kept looking for. I almost felt like each thing I wrote, I was looking for the thing that would kind of hold it all together. And then that one I wrote last night, and I thought, oh, this holds it all together. So,
Hold it all together, meaning the 10 of them, or each individual one?
the 10 of them, that somehow I wanted some not continuity, but some sense that this is one person speaking. That I was trying to, a lot of it does come from him, but then I add a lot and take it apart and do all sorts of things to it. So, yeah. And then now I've decided, I decided last night at 1, I groaned and I cursed Eric. If he felt bad, he'll know why. If I had a little doll, I would have stabbed it. I said, oh no, I'm going to have to write 24 of these now. That would be the only way to really get inside what he's about. Because there's all sorts of things about him that intrigue me and interest me.
Well, that relates to the other question I had, which is when you talked about expanding the 10 into 24, do you already have an idea about how they fit together? It sounds
No,
like
I
you're
have
not writing them sequentially.
No, I'm not. I have subjects, like he has this whole play about sleep, which I thought is really interesting, so I know I want to write about that, and I was thinking about Artaud and some other stuff, and then I liked the one of the stage where the stage is, the curtains are drawn back and the actor is a monochrome painting, and that I thought, how would I do something with that? So partly it's trying to figure out how to be responsive to the work but not be literal or reductive about it, and I think that was the big challenge. When I said the thing about blue, sponge, I was joking and being ironic that you could be very literal and it'd be a kind of surface way to look at his work, and I wanted to do something else. So, and 24, I just think because there's 24 hours in a day, I don't know, so somehow that became the number in my head. If you can come up with a smaller number, I'll be happy to take it.
That's some seance, and I want to go to the next one. You started to mention some of the other things that are interesting to you about him. Could you go into some of the others?
Well, I first saw a big body of his work in Nice in I think around 1991 or 92, and I had only heard about him and saw maybe one work here and one work here. And I remember going to this. It's a museum with two buildings and a kind of walkway between them, and I had gone to see a Marc de Souvre show, and then I walked over to this other section where they had a lot of Yves Kleins, and I was just flummoxed. And I just went, wait a second. And also this, I mean, I think it's starting to happen. It occurred to me early on as an art writer that not everything, that New York was not the only story. But I remember in the 80s, a friend of mine who I won't name said to me, "Oh, Yves Klein, he's a charlatan." And I thought, well, that could be interesting. Why be moralistic about it, And, I mean, we're in the art world. We have to be moralistic. So I kind of, and that person was upset that he faked the photograph of him leaping into the void. And I thought, well, how else could he do it, And it's so elegant, that photograph. I mean, so, and I love that photograph. I mean, that sort of stuck in my head too. And then seeing all the work, and also that he tried all these different things and he worked in all these different ways. I thought that was very courageous. I mean, I just thought this today. I was with Eric and Ashley. He had 3 heart attacks and died at 32. And so one of the things, and he talks about his psychological selves fighting with his fundamental self. And I didn't want to get into a psychological self, but I do think there is something to be said about someone trying to get out of a body that's had and to be so athletic, to know judo and this and that. And he just must have been in some way tormented. And yet he's so elegant that he never, in America, that you would have a memoir at 27, right? I mean, I'm being ironic, but I think, you know what I mean? He had a very interesting way of dealing with his own personal life and trying to get beyond it, And I think great art always exceeds its biography, but it doesn't lose it, that some of it comes with you, I don't know if that answers any questions, but anything else? Oh, don't be shy.
Just a
Okay.
quick reminder to fill out your blue sheets to win a copy if you want to be in the raffle. Oh, Jennifer has. You got it.
Hi, I have a question about writing, I guess, kind of in a persona poem
Yeah.
versus even just your own normal process. I mean, is that different?
No. No, I wrote a whole series of poems called Genghis Chan, Private Eye,
Right.
in which I make up a Chinese detective that's part Charlie Chan and part Genghis Khan. Because I figure those are the 2 Asians most Americans know quite well.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, it's like a grumpy detective complaining about things. And there's 30 that have been published. I've now written about 45. So and I've written a poem called, I was a poet in the House of Frankenstein, in which it details every movie that Boris Karloff was ever in that we know about. Because he plays many Asians and other characters. I said to someone, I think it's interesting that he played Asians in Frankenstein. That somehow, I know there's a connection there, but no one wants to say it. So I just detail it without commentary. And then I've written a lot of poems based on Peter Lorre playing Mr. Moto. A persona is something I use quite a lot.
Is it different when you have this other sort of source area, like his, either interview material, written material, so that when you're reading back him and reading back you, is there a certain sort of threshold you reach where you kind of can't tell, or where that's where
That's what I
sense
want to get
happens?
to. I'm really interested in that moment where I don't know. I mean, I write these things out, and then after a while, I don't look at the source, and I just play with what I have, and I start to move it all around, and I don't know where. I want to get to the part where I don't know where his writing ends and mine begins, that I'm really trying to be in his vocabulary, his way of thinking, as close as I can be. I mean, obviously I add some of my own stuff, but I feel like, that I'm him at that moment. I know that's presumptuous, but
No, yeah, I mean, I
all
think you said
poets
it
are
really well with
presumptuous. What?
with fiction being, that moment in the poem where you spoke about it
Right.
being like that moment. So
Yeah, I definitely want to be in that. I mean, I feel like I want to channel them. Also, I think of poets like Jack Spicer writing by dictation, that I feel like I'm writing by dictation. I mean, I told Eric this thing. I hope Klaus isn't here. He'll probably. So, there's a translation of all of his writings, and it was translated by Klaus Altman, who I knew many years ago, but I believe Klaus is German, and he's translating from French into English. And I got focused on all the typos in the translation. So that's how literal I got. So there's one where it's something about going on an errand, but he has it as going on an error. So then I thought, this is like a gift. I have to figure out how to use these mistakes and things like that. So I mean, I kind of really, when I read a book, I get so into it that I'm even interested in the mistakes in the book, and it all becomes this kind of, it'll sound druggy, but it becomes a hallucination after a while, and I think that's the only way I know how to write. I mean, I think it's the way I write about art or write poetry. I just get completely preoccupied with it, I make a boring dinner guest, but any other questions? Yeah?
Did you go to any of the, visual sources to kind of meditate on for
No.
any of this? Or
No.
Strictly.
I mean, I know his work, and
Oh, just
I did think about it when I just went through this show, but I just came up with dumb associations like, oh, it looks like the surface of the moon, but it's red. And he's not pictorial in a way. I mean, he's sort of against the pictorial. And if you write a poem that's pictorial, you've betrayed him. And I think in a way you'd have to figure out how to write an abstract poem that's related to what he does visually. And I don't think that's impossible. I think it's possible, but it's not something I've so far tried. I mean, the kind of precedent for that would be to think about what Gertrude Stein did or some other people, but or Klebnikov, or you could find a figure who, or even Mallarmé, but I didn't want to do that. I felt like it would betray him to be pictorial. I mean, the one time I'm pictorial in this piece where I said the rust, the red color, I say it's a betrayal, right? I mean, I turn against it. I have Klein turn against it and say that's not good enough. You want to go beyond that, because I think he wanted to destroy the pictorial, which I think is, I mean, he is painting after World War II, and there is this kind of devastation that many artists, Europeans felt in a different way than the Americans, and I think that was major to him. But I didn't want to also focus on that in a kind of literalizing way, because it's easy to be reductive with an artist, like we live in a Newtonian universe. This happened, and that's why the artist did that. He had a bad childhood, and then he made these paintings, and I find that kind of awful, because I mean, most of us have had bad childhoods. That's why we are who we are, but it doesn't mean we all become painters. I didn't just say that. Any other, yes?
It seems, as I was listening to your poetry, you seem to open through your use of language, you opened up, I mean, I could see what his paintings were about, and I really felt that. You didn't, most of your language was very, very plain and also somewhat abstract, but it really did open, I mean, I could see the infinite in, I think that's what you were trying to do?
Yeah, yeah. Think about it. We're living in infinity right at this very moment, but we don't. It's not a thought we want to carry around with us and be completely conscious of all the time. It's sort of devastating. You go, ugh, and or you think, oh, the life in that star, was born, came, and the star doesn't exist, and it started off 280, million light years ago, and now it's finally here. Oh, thank you. I think he wanted to have that kind of consciousness, but I think not many people do, and I think that he did, and I think he accepts it in a way, in a kind of graceful, he accepts his mortality in a graceful way, and actually is optimistic. And one of the things that really struck me was an interview that, not a review, I think in the New York Times, saying that what he wanted was impossible, and somehow the reviewer was a little upset about that. And I thought, well, that's so great to want the impossible, What else would you want? And it's sort of optimistic in a way to want something so impossible. So I'm glad. Thank you for saying that I opened the paintings up, because that's what I was trying to do. In another way, because I think you can be, he paints from 54 to 62, and I think it's in 61 that Frank Stella says what you see is what you see. And he's really a literalist, and that kind of looking at art is still dominant. We're against metaphor, we're against this, we're against that. We're kind of materialists, and I think that's why Klein was so difficult for people to accept, because they wanted to see him literally, and they didn't want to believe that he believed in the infinite. He was just making monochrome paintings, right? But he wasn't. It's very touching, that voto he has to the saint, right? Please accept this gift. It's kind of heartbreaking, actually, because as someone who's not particularly religious, you feel his belief is real. I felt his belief was real. I didn't think he was ironic. And I don't have that belief, but I must admit it's kind of comforting, right, to have it. And I was sort of, for a moment, envious, but I also love that he was so, it's sort of an amazing gesture to make that little voto and say it's a work of art, because it's so easy to be laughed at for a gesture that seems to me so kind of pure. I can't think of another word. There's a purity to that little voto object, and I felt like, he's not a charlatan. I don't know what he is, and that's why I want to keep writing the poems. I don't think I'll come up with an answer of who he is. I think what will happen is I'll realize I know him even less than I thought I did. But I love that photo. It was so small, I could have stolen it, but Eric wouldn't let me. That's how impure I am. So, any more questions? Yes?
Once again.
Thank you. It's been great having you here.
Oh, thanks.
I was wondering if you consider yourself an art critic, and what you think the difference. It's a long line of art of poets and art writers, Frank O'Hara and Ashbury.
Right.
Yourself, of course. What you bring to the table that's different from the more analytic, say, Cuspid or Danto or Hickey or something like that. And maybe your thoughts on the state of criticism these days.
Ooh.
Yeah.
It's
I'm really
so-
a boring dinner guest.
No, I mean, criticism has become so ideological. And so, I mean, Hal Foster in a book talks about why he didn't like the poets because they had no paradigm or model. And I said this to this poet who was my teacher, Robert Kelly. He said, he had the best answer. He said, oh, I have a paradigm, I just can't fit it through the door. I guess as a critic, more and more what I'm interested in is not breaking, that sounds sort of violent, but kind of contributing to the cracks in the facade, trying to see, because it's like the stories that get told seem so set, and then no one ever challenges them, and it becomes a kind of received wisdom. And yet, really, if you think about it, art has to be kind of seen freshly by every generation, and that's what makes it lively and interesting. And so I feel like, well, I'm going to try and write about the artists that I care about to see if they could be seen differently or freshly, and not out of any reactionary thing, but just kind of learn to see them for myself, And Johns was the one that became one of my big preoccupations, but I've written about a lot of other people for the same reason, to see if you could see. And I think also, I mean, Bob Creeley often said this and said it to me, it's, you want to get out of the habits of your own thinking. And I feel like with writing about art, it helps me get out of my habits. The minute I think, oh, this is the way it is, someone's going to come along and show me work, and I'm going to go, oh, well, now what do I say, or what do I do? So it keeps me alive, I think. But I also feel like there's not enough dialogue in the art world that's like, that the artists are more lively than the art writers, that they're having the real conversation with each other, and the art writers are missing the boat. If so-and-so is making a certain kind of painting, and then some other painter is having an argument with them, maybe directly or indirectly, that's interesting, and somehow someone should talk about that argument, because no one has a purchase on the truth, right? We only arrive at our truths, and some of them are quite interesting to consider, and I think, but we feel guilty about art, right? It's sensual if it's a painting, and we have this puritanical, then we're mad that it costs money, and that means that the artist is evil because he sells his work for money. I don't know, I'm not mad that artists make money. I think it's money's a kind of poetry, said Wallace Stevens, right? So all of that, people get too, I think, closed down about it, or they're afraid. I think the reason people say painting is dead is they're afraid of it. And the reason they're afraid of it is I think it gets you to places that you may not want to comfortably go to, and I don't mean that, and I just, like Robert Ryman, the fact that he keeps making a different painting with such a limited thing tells you that you haven't looked at the most ordinary things in the world, right? I mean, I'll just finish. So I had a class, and they had to go see these different shows, and this student went to the Ryman show. She said, they're all white, right? I said, well, that's white. I pointed to the wall, and that's white, and that's white. And then they all have different textures. How closely did you look at the work? And she was like sort of annoyed with me, but I wasn't being ironic. It was like, how closely do we look at the world we're in? So then, if you think that way, you have to say that there's a political side to his work, to his aesthetic, because he's saying we're not looking at our own, what's right in front of us clearly. And if we did, maybe we would, quote, live differently. But he's not telling us how to live different. You know what I mean? That there is, Reinhardt said all art is political, and I think he's correct, and I think we only want to say, oh, he's political because he says he's political. And that makes a lot of that art easier to understand, and we can pat ourselves on the back. And Ray Chow, the Chinese theorist, said there's a gap between those who accrue wealth through being political, and do they talk about that gap, right? So if you say you're a political artist but you make a lot of money, does that, you make a bigger gap between who you're making art about and yourself? How do you deal with that gap? And yet Ray Chow's comment is never brought into the discussion. And I think things like that, I think we could be interesting dinner partners. Okay, thanks. Any more questions? Yeah?
When you said art is made, my contention is art is made to be discussed in an organic capacity, and the discussion arises from being present. I feel as though technological society has become a kind of succubus to that notion, because people are putting their art and energy in a technological venue, and that takes away from creating an organic venue and also discussion. So I was wondering if you could comment on that, based on the creation of art from a technological kind of milieu, and kind of transferring that to a discussion and organic creation, if that makes sense.
That was so intellectual, my brain melted. A few things. I actually, someone asked me if I read blogs on art, and I actually do. So I think that, the world changes, and somehow you can't be nostalgic for what was earlier, so you have to think, well, what's good about the internet and what's bad. One of the things that I think is interesting is that alternative spaces are happening because of the internet. That you can have, my wife's a painter, and she's going to show with someone who shows work in his house. And somehow, because he has an internet presence, people will know about it. I think that's really great, because it sort of steps out of the commercial world, right? So that already is a healthy thing. And I think it does generate discussions on blogs, that they're discussions. If you ever went on the poetics list in Buffalo, you'd know how chatty poets can be about any old thing. I had to reduce it to only getting 50 emails a day. And then finally I just dropped out. But, for about a year and a half, it was pretty lively. I'm not against it. I think technology just hasn't been figured out how to, no, I can't say that. That's a generalization. I don't know, I'm not against it. I don't know about the word organic. That's sort of changed. When we got organic farming, we sort of lost what organic might mean, right? You're always looking for the food that's organic. I always distrust those labels. I'm going to eat only organic food. I'm not going to eat cardboard, okay? I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to have a hard thing about technology, because actually I love technology. There, I said it. You know why? Because I can stay home all day, write an essay, get my food delivered to me, and not have to stand in line in the post office, because I can just press send. And that to me is great. My dog is unhappy because I might not take it out for a walk enough. But I think there's something about technology that's useful. And I also think artists get in touch with each other. And artists put their work up on sites so that you can actually, as an art critic, kind of stealthily visit artist sites and look at work and see if it's interesting. And then if you want, go to their studio. I think all that's useful, actually. So more power to it. Any other questions? I stealthily go to lots of studios, so I love it, actually. It's like being a paid voyeur. Kind of interesting. Oh my God, a voyeur is speaking to us. No more questions? What's wrong with you people? You're brimming with curiosity. Well, thank you for coming. I had a great time writing this.